welcome to another episode of In Depth, where every week we bring you a topic that we dive inside up to the basis for every individual to understand. My name is Kaddy, Jobe, your host today, and with me is Dr. Ousman Gajigo. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Briefly explain yourself to the ABS viewers, what you do, who you are.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I am an economist by training. Let me start out by saying where I'm from. I was born in Fatoto in Upper River region, but my parents are from two different regions. I'm also equally from Upper Badibu in Sabak Sanja. I did my high school in Nusrat High School and 1 year of Form 6 at Gambia High School before I left for the US, where I did my bachelor's, master's, and PhD. After completing my doctorate, I worked for several places, starting with Columbia University, then World Bank, African Development Bank, briefly with the UN, and then back at the African Development Bank. But I have since 2015, I've been back in the country, and I operate a farm. So even though I'm an economist by training, I guess you can consider me now as a professional farmer. In addition to running a farm, I also am the founder of a non-profit foundation called Seeds for Prosperity that helps Gambian horticultural farmers across the whole country. So now I wear two hats, both as an economist and also as a farmer.
You made mention that you are now interested in pursuing or having farms in the Gambia in different areas. What made you interested in doing those things?
I've always had an interest in agriculture since I was very young. So I have engaged in tree planting, even as a toddler. In fact, I remember when I was still in primary school, or as we call it then, currently lower basic school, when we were still eating fruits that I planted as seedlings as a kid. So I've had passion for agriculture for quite a long time. So for me, this is when I reached the point this day in my life. Basically, I found that I am in an opportunity to invest a lot more, and this is after many years of education and experience around the world. So I've learned quite a bit about agriculture. So this was an opportunity to come back to my country and actually invest in the sector in a very substantial way.
Yeah, being a farmer, you must be very aware of the social economic developments in the Gambia. Have you undertaken any personal business development in contributing to the social economic development of the country?
Well, yeah, I think there are different ways you can contribute to that. Obviously, you can contribute to that. Any business, even if you start a small farm as a business, you can contribute to that. You can also go and help in a philanthropic way. It doesn't have to be like a project or a philanthropic success. Even a private farm, a private agribusiness farm, you can contribute socially and economically to the development of the country. So I guess in a way you can say I've contributed in multiple ways. One, I have an agribusiness farm that is being operated as a business that employs several people, and it makes it sells its produce on the market. Also, by starting the non-profit foundation, I've also tried to assist those farms that are less fortunate by looking at what their main constraints are and assisting them through philanthropic means. Excuse me. So I think, at least on my part, those are multiple avenues through which I've been able to contribute socially and economically.
Yeah, you made mention of the business part of your work and the philanthropist part of your work. Can you please tell the ABS viewers the name of your business and the philanthropist part of your business? And can you explain to us one major thing or one major contribution in detail of how you help Gambia towards the social economic development of the country?
Yeah, so the the private business that I actually own is called Premier Green Limited, and the philanthropic part is basically called Seeds for Prosperity. So, in terms of the philanthropic part, what we actually do, we went around before we set up the foundation. We went around the country to find out what are the major problems these horticultural farms in the country face. And one of the things we discovered is that the buying of the seeds is a major problem. Of course, it's not the only one. Sometimes irrigation is a problem, a good fence is a problem, storing is a problem, marketing is a problem. But our main area of focus, not exclusively, but our main area of focus is provision of high quality vegetable seeds to horticultural farms in the country.
I'll have to ask you this question because I am asking you this question personally.
Okay.
You made mention that you did your education in the US.
Yes.
You have the opportunity to work in the US. Because you have a doctoral degree, you can have a very high position in any institution that you're working at. What motivated you to come back to the country to be a horticultural farmer? Because today, I personally, I can Jobe, if they give me an American visa and they say, okay, here's a farm, we're providing you all the necessary materials for you to contribute your quota. Every young person will think staying in America and having a very good job. What was the motivation? Because I know it would have been a very difficult decision for you to take. Leaving America behind to come here, individuals looking down at you. Because to be honest, in the society that we are in, if a farmer is attached to your name, no matter the title that you have, people look down on you. So what motivated you?
Well, I hope that will change. I mean, for me, it wasn't a difficult decision, obviously. I mean, we all understand that if you are in the US, you have lots of opportunities. And I was lucky enough to get scholarship and to finish my education. I did stay after my education to work a bit, learn important skills, have some experiences that I believe I can bring back. But I've always intended to come back to Gambia. My plan had never been to stay permanently in the US, which is why, despite living there for many years, I never had American citizenship. My heart has always been back in the Gambia to come and work here. So for me, agriculture, I think we need to have some fundamental shifts in norms. In many parts of the world, it's not looked down upon. In countries that are well developed, nobody looks down on a farmer in Europe or in the US or in many parts of Asia. And I think for a country like the Gambia, where agriculture is actually one of the, if not the most important sector, it is very important that we have a fundamental shift in how we look at the sector. It's also understandable why people tend to look low on agriculture, because when we think of agriculture in the Gambia, we think of back-breaking work that our grandfathers used to do in the village. The fact that that is happening is actually a failure of many, in many ways, because if the investments and the planning agriculture that were warranted, if they had happened, people should have been using modern tools in farming. There should be far more efficiency, and the image that we have of agriculture should be fundamentally different from the image that we have today. So it's understandable why people, many young people still do not look highly upon agriculture as a career. But I think that is changing. More and more you are seeing people coming from outside and they are buying land, trying to start agricultural projects. And I think over time people will realize that not only agriculture, but specifically in horticulture, there is a lot of scope to do activities that are high return, that are lucrative, and that in many ways should be considered on the same level as starting an IT business.
Having an established private business and having a philanthropist organization. Can you please discuss a time when you had to make a very difficult decision in horticultural farm?
Well, I mean, whether it's a farm or a philanthropic organization, this foundation, it's they are all difficult and challenging in their own ways. To give you an idea, last year we we help at least over 80 village gardens with seeds. Now, make the logistics of going around the whole country and giving seeds to all of these gardens is quite immense. So one of the biggest constraints that you have as an individual, even if that is your job solely, is how to manage your time. So given that I have my own business to run after, which are spread across the whole country, because I have one farm in West Coast, I have another farm in URR, I have another one in NBR. They are quite spread apart. Visiting all of them can be challenging. To combine that with non-profit foundation work, where you are covering again farms, running from Kapong all the way to Koina, from Wuli all the way to Nyomi, is quite challenging. So the most difficult decision has been how to optimize one's time across all of the work you are doing. And sometimes, inevitably, you find yourself in a time period where you have to decide, you have only a small amount of time, you can only do one or the other, you cannot do both. And there have been times where I had to put my own business on the side to make sure that these village gardens we are supporting, they have their seeds on time.
Yeah. Considering that this society lacks a centralized database system, how do we stay updated on the latest research and development in horticulture?
Well, luckily for me, I mean, as somebody who did a PhD, I do have a background as a researcher. So when I was in other institutions, I was a research economist, and one of my areas of specialization was agricultural economics. So as part of my work in other organizations, I have had to make sure that I'm quite up to date with various sources of information, whether it's statistics on agriculture in general or something in horticulture in particular. But almost inevitably, when you are trying to do something on the ground, apart from just being a researcher, you find that there is sometimes some information that you need that is not available. For instance, when we wanted to set up the non-profit foundation to help these human gardens across the country, we actually asked the ministry whether there is a database, a list of all of the farms in the Gambia and what their characteristics are. They don't have such a list. So we have to go around the country, collect data for ourselves, and maintain a database of farms in the country, their size, the number of women, what they grow, what problems they have, and maintain that database, and we kind of update the database annually. So that is something we have to create and to make our own task, because if we needed to depend on anything, we wouldn't have been able to move forward with it. So you try to find out information you can, and when it's not available, you do the primary research yourself.
Still talking about database and how we can centralize it in terms of horticulture. Different farms, most women are not literate. They don't know how to use the computer or write. You made mention of helping 90 farms across the country within the last year. How can those people keep track or records of the seedlings that we give them, things that happened within? Because having to go around those farms again annually to collect data that you think they've recorded, you might miss some data. They might forget, or even if it is written, it might be lost because it's paper. Most women don't know how to use the computer in these gardens. So is there a means or ways that you guys keep track of all these gardens in keeping these data intact?
Yeah, I mean, first, the expectation is not that the farmers themselves will be collecting the data. That's not the role of the farmers, and there will be no expectation that they'll be collecting the data. That would be the role of the data collectors and whatever statisticians in the government. I mean, so there's supposed to be a directorate within agriculture that's supposed to be keeping this. For our own purposes, we are not also relying on these rural farmers to collect the data. When we go around to actually distribute the seeds, that's the time we actually collect the information in terms of the seeds that are distributed, the quantities, the size of the farm, the number of farms that are in there, and we try to get an estimate of, like, sometimes how much they're going to produce, how much losses they have, whether through spoil it in the field or through post-harvest losses. So the challenge, I don't think the approach is not really to train these farmers on how to collect data. That would not be appropriate, but there should be people who are able to do that and who should be better placed to do that. It all depends on having a mechanism that, where you put the right people and give them the responsibilities according to how well placed they are to carry out the functions.
Do you have any thoughts on the Gambia having a centralized library database system, not just for agricultural matter, but for anything?
No, absolutely. I mean, the more information you have, the better. So in our specific case, for instance, it would have saved us a lot of time. The resources we spend in terms of going around in the country, the amount of fuel we spend individually recording the farms, that money could have been better spent towards helping some farm. But we had to do that because the information we needed wasn't available. So I think if you had a database that is a depository of relevant information about agricultural production in the Gambia, the opportunities around the country, you can help not only non-profit foundations, but investors who would want to come in the Gambia. Let's say information on soil types, information on topography across different parts of the country. That sort of information would then reduce the barriers to potential investors coming in. So it would be useful not only for people who are trying to set up non-profit foundations, but it will also be useful for, I think, investors, which we need, because without private sector investment, whether they are Gambians or foreigners, the agricultural sector will find it very difficult to move. So I think to answer your question, whether it is education, whether it is health, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's agriculture, any other sector, the more information you have there, the better. And the government is the best, is the entity that is best positioned to actually provide that, because information is a public good. It's a public good with externalities, and therefore a private entity is not well placed to provide it because they cannot get the returns internalized to them. So you need to have an entity that is the public, that have a larger role beyond just generating profit, but also that has a larger responsibility for developing that sector. And by creating an enabling environment, lowering the barriers to entry, and one of those barriers is actually information. If a foreigner comes and wants to do onion production, or wants to do rice, or wants to do some kind of horticulture, not every area is equally suited to it. And if that foreigner is able to go to a database and quickly find out the information they need, it increases the efficiency of investment for that foreigner, and time that is spent looking for that information or paying somebody to go and collect that is time that could have been used to expedite their investments.
Thank you very much. Still on the topic of horticulture in the Gambia, we'll move to another section of current status and future insights. My question to you, Dr. Gajigo, is could you provide an context on the historical development of horticultural farming in the Gambia within the broad landscape of Africa?
Horticulture has been going in the Gambia for at least, about, from what I recall reading, about 1,000 years. Not as early as other forms of agriculture like rice cultivation, but it's something that has been ongoing. There has been recorded history of people growing tree crops or smaller things in horticulture for since like the 1400s or even earlier than that. That is the recorded part, so it's highly likely that it has been ongoing in periods earlier than that, but wasn't recorded. I think before we go any further, it's important when we're talking about horticulture, what do we mean by horticulture as distinct from other kinds of agriculture? When we say horticulture, generally what it means is that there are few dimensions where it's different from other forms of agriculture like rice cultivation. That is technically known as agronomy. Yeah. So what's the difference between agronomy and horticulture? Horticulture is mainly different from other forms of agriculture due to scale. So the other kinds of agriculture is large-scale production of food, maybe for fuel and other purposes. Horticulture is more smaller scale cultivation of vegetables and fruit trees, and it's done on an intensive basis, and the crops or the vegetables that are grown are high value. So that's just to be clear to the viewers, the distinction when we talk about horticulture, how does it differ from, let's say, ground cultivation or rice or millet?
Dr. Gajigo, how will you explain the value of horticulture and horticultural farming in the society and economy of the Gambia?
It's very difficult to overstate the value of horticulture in the Gambia. As we already know, agriculture is one of the most important sectors in the Gambia, and horticulture is a major component of it. It's a high return activity because horticulture tends to deal with high value crops in an intensive way. So even a small plot of horticultural production can easily exceed the value of a large field of traditional cropping. I can give you an example. A small area of, let's say, 50 by 50, if you do that in onion production, given the yield that you expect in onion, you'll be able to generate far more than 100 by 100, or even a 200 by 200 of groundnut cultivation. So horticulture is it's distinct in that way. So it has the potential to bring enormous value to the economy. And I can go a bit deeper in that. If you look at areas of whether food security, employment generation, livelihoods, or agro-processing, these are all areas in an economy that can benefit tremendously from horticultural sector. For instance, we all know that vegetable and fruits are a significant component of our diet. So when these things are produced adequately and in the right way, food security can be guaranteed. If not guaranteed, but at least food insecurity can be lessened. We also know that agriculture, all sectors of agriculture, subsectors of agriculture, especially in horticulture, they are very labor intensive. So when there is adequate investment and challenges are addressed, even a small farm can generate a lot of employment. So on a national level, a lot of young people, men, women, and older people can be engaged in horticultural activities. So it can generate employment, provide incomes, and reduce employment. The other thing also is that Gambia, despite its potential for horticultural production, we import a lot of vegetables. For instance, if you go to any of the shops nowadays, or a few months ago, you see a lot of onions coming all the way from Holland, which is a bit sad because this country can produce enough onions to not only meet our needs but to export. So when you have investments in horticultural sector, you can not only reduce your importation bill, but you can actually export. And this export will generate forex revenue. Right now, one of the reasons why our dollar falls in value constantly is because we import far more than we export. And if we have a well-developed horticultural sector, we have a real potential to actually increase our net exports and therefore reduce the depreciation pressure that our currency is undergoing. And therefore, we can definitely reduce the cost of living. Another area where horticulture can also contribute tremendously is through agro-processing. If you're going to do agro-processing in your country, you must have local production of a certain critical scale, and it must be regular and must be predictable, because factories that need to order from those inputs need to have predictable supply chains. So, I can list many other things, but I think it suffices from these four areas to see how important horticulture is to national development or social development.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gajigo. What's the best practice for managing horticultural supply chain from seed sourcing to plant sale?
If you want to talk about best practices in general, it would be, it might be obviously, you can talk about something, but what I find more useful is to actually look at our context and find the practices that address the challenges we have in our sector. So in the Gambia, if you look at horticulture, or let's say you go to these village gardens, you can easily pinpoint the major problems they have. And within the value chain, there is quite a lot, ranging from seeds, fertilizer, pest control, irrigation, protection of crops during production, storage, and distribution. So the best practice is dependent on the context. In the Gambian context, we want to find out what are the challenges that our farmers have, and then identify those practices that address those challenges. And if you go around, in our project Seeds for Prosperity, this philanthropic foundation that works with thousands of farmers, the key challenges we run into that farmers tell us that they do have is problem of water, they have problems of seeds, pest control, storage is a major problem, and marketing is a major problem. So these are some of the challenges they face. And if we want to talk about best practices, I think we need to anchor it within the challenges that are actually occurring within our environment.
Thank you very much. You've made mention of challenges farmers face. This is the Gambia. You can produce tons and tons and tons and tons of vegetables. You've made mention of storage problem, but sales, because if you don't have a ready-made market for these products, you cannot store them, and they're going to perish as time goes on. Do you have any idea or solution you can give to these farmers in terms of that area?
Well, the solution is not really my solution, it's a well-known solution. The problem with horticulture, obviously, the advantage is that they are high-value products, but the disadvantage is that many of them are highly perishable, which means without a controlled environment in which they are kept, they will quickly be lost through spoilage or other environmental factors. So the solution here is well known, and basically it requires some serious investment. So if you are going to address the issue of spoilage, every horticultural garden needs to have its own cold storage. That is something that is definitely within the means of the government, or not only the government, but projects that do come to the country and address these problems. So the solution doesn't require any new thinking. The problem that is there is well known, and the solution is also well known. There's no innovation or new thinking is required. So to make sure that, let's say, 80% or 90% of the tomatoes that are grown that actually spoil instead of being eaten, to make sure that that doesn't happen, we need to have cold storage. The market, we have a ready-made market. By the way, everything we grow here, there's a market for it. The problem we have is that all of the garden season starts around November, and everybody would plant their tomatoes around that time. So about 4 months, starting around March or so, almost all the tomatoes will be ready. And when they are ready, now not everyone can take their tomatoes to the market at the same time because the price will collapse. So it would make sense for some farmers to actually store them and then bring what is needed, and then over the course of several weeks sell the tomatoes. Unfortunately, due to lack of cold storage, everyone takes their tomatoes at the same time, and then they are faced with this horrendous situation of basically taking what they would call, like they will tell you, I've been to some of these gardens, one of them will tell you, Nganda Peñuaro Samba Marso, Ikonye Peñuaro $75. So it's a very, very tragic situation, and we've worked with farmers in Badiku, for instance. Some of the farmers in Iliasa and Jabakunda and Selkini told me situations where a whole peñuaro you take it to Farafenni after paying fare. You go there, the area council comes and collects some juice, and then you are left with selling a whole peñuaro for like $100 if you are lucky, or $75. That's basically telling the farmer that they'll have zero return on their activity.
Dr. Gajigo, can you share your experience and thoughts on farmers' post-harvest handling of crops in these areas, including success and challenges?
Yeah, I mean, one thing you will find out is that in many of the gardens there is a lot of the women would dedicate a bigger share of their gardens to onions as opposed to other vegetables. Now, why is that? They are trying to make ends meet because onions can be stored for weeks. Not because onion is the most important or the most lucrative vegetable. I mean, obviously, there's a high demand for vegetable. Anything you are cooking, essentially, you will need some onion. But I believe part of that strategy is to minimize their loss. They are trying to make, accept a manageable situation out of very unfavorable circumstances. Basically, when it comes to post-harvest handling, there's just not too many ways about it. As I said in the my last response, this is something the government needs to go from just talking about it to actually acting on it. Because if you go around the whole country, there is not a single farm in the country that can tell you we have cold storage. Of course, there is a few projects here and there, like if you go to the farm, the women garden in Sukuta or Pusumbala, where they build a small demonstration cold storage, but it is like maybe 3 meters by 3 meters. It cannot store even a few beds worth of vegetables in there. So when I talk about adequate cold storage, not a single garden in the Gambia has it. And we are talking about over 50 years of independence, and we still talk about agriculture as the most important sector. So that is a major shortcoming.
Given the impact of pollution on our society, what is your perspective on how farmers in these areas dispose of waste materials?
When it comes to problems in farming, one of the least I would worry about is pollution by farmers. When people talk about pollution in general in farming, you are talking about when there is like excessive use of chemical fertilizer and there is runoff of that into lakes, rivers, streams, or what have you. That is not a problem in the Gambia. I'm not saying it's not a problem that that is completely zero, but in the scale, among the problems we have, it is one of the least to worry about. Let me give you a specific example. Globally, on average, the fertilizer usage is about 130 kilograms per arable land per year. That is the use of fertilizer. The African average is 18 kilograms per arable land. Do you know what the average in Gambia is? It's 3 kilograms per hectare of arable land.
But Dr. Gajigo, with the innovation in farming, you guys tend to use a lot of machineries now. Those machineries can cause pollution.
Like what kind of pollution?
Like, for example, you're using, how do they call it? The one that dig the soil.
Okay.
Yeah.
A plow, tractor plow?
Plow, exactly. Most machines that are sent to the Gambia are second-hand machines. You on it, a lot of pollution is coming out because it's not a good machine. Those pollutions that are going in there affects surroundings and other myths. It's true, fertilizers maybe do not pollute in the Gambia much, but with innovative farming, in what way can you guys find a solution? Because there is pollution.
Yes, there is pollution, but you have to put it in the context of what is needed. Now, any machine that uses fuel is going to have an exhaust. Yeah. If you use a car, it's going to have a pollution. No, there's no machinery out there that I know of that's not going to produce some level of pollution. If you want factories that will produce food or do processing, there will be pollution. The discussion here, I think, is not to talk about any pollution. If you want zero pollution, you can have zero pollution, but you'll have zero economic activity. Because even the ambulance that will take an injured person to the hospital will be polluting.
Yes.
The point here is, have we reached a level where the pollution is excessive and where the benefit that pollution is that is resulting, where the benefit we are getting from the activity exceeds or is lower than the pollution cost we are generating. So let's go to the example of tractor. Every tractor obviously will consume a lot of fuel and it will generate pollution. But the question to ask ourselves is, are we in a situation in the Gambia where we have so many tractors that the pollution they are generating is far higher relative to whatever economic benefit we are getting from them in the field. Just as the example I gave you with regards to fertilizer, is the same thing with regards to tractor. In fact, in the Gambia, the tractor per capita is also lower than any developing country, like the average for developing country. Sorry, let me correct myself. The tractor average in the Gambia per farmer is lower than the African average. The point being, we are very far from that situation where pollution as a major concern in agriculture should even make it into a policy discussion, because we do not in fact use enough fertilizer, we do not have too much power tillers, we do not have too much tractors, we do not have too much trucks. If you, in any economic development, whether outside, even outside of agriculture, whether it's processing or anything, there will be some activities that will have a negative effect on the environment. But when it comes to horticulture as a subsector of agriculture, my position is, and I think this is backed by evidence, my position is that pollution generation is not a major concern as right now.
Thank you for clarifying that point. The question I want to ask now is, with various horticultural projects in town, how do we assess the potential impact of new projects in local ecosystems and the economy?
It's a very good question. The first question I would want, if as a Gambian, I would want to ask is, okay, we have these projects, we see there are vehicles going up and down. What impact are they having on the horticultural sector? I think it's very limited. Now, in answering your question, I'll make a distinction about two types of beneficiaries in the country. So when you talk about horticulture, you can have these village gardens that are done mainly by women. You can also have agribusiness farms or companies like My Premier Green or many other farms that are coming up, GHE and many of those. If you talk about agribusiness farms that are run as business, now even some of these projects have what is called grant matching schemes. They provide grants. If they do their selections very well, those can have high impact, because if you provide a grant to a business where it is run by somebody with very high business acumen and they run their farm in a very efficient way, that grant can enable their business to do the investment that is troubling them, expand, generate more employment, increase their supply in the market. So I think for an ongoing business where you have very efficient managers, these projects, if they provide some grant matching, can have a very high impact. The other group, which is where most horticultural activity is taking place, is the village garden that are occupied mainly by women. It's a bit different. Like I said, from my experience with the Seeds for Prosperity Foundation going around the country, we've pretty much engaged, visited close to 200 farms around the country. If you look at the problems they face, from years back, it's essentially the same problems they face. The issues of lack of fence, not sufficient amount of water, as we talked about, no storage, pest control is a problem. And some of these farms, let me give you an example. There is this farm in Salikenya, in Badiku, where they've had that women farm for close to 50 years. But you go there each year, they have to rebuild their fence, the women by themselves. They have to take their cutlass and clear the area by themselves. Until this year, they've never had even a single tap in there. They have to draw everything from a well. Now, Salikenya is not a hamlet or a small village. It's a very big village. There are some people who will grow up in Salikenya and not know each other. So, and it's not the only one. That you go to C4 here, they have not been able to farm in their garden for many years because the fence collapsed and the water system is not working. Now, if you sit down and do a calculation and say, okay, how many farms are in the Gambia? Let's record all of the problems that they have in terms of seeds, in terms of other inputs, in terms of irrigation, in terms of fencing, in terms of storage, you calculate that the cost of that in a 5-year period is less than $10 million. I have done that calculation. Now, let's ask ourselves, these projects that do come, like that are financed by World Bank, African Development Bank, IFAD, each of these projects, how much financing do they get from these organizations? Over the past 10 years, how many of these projects do we have? I can count 5. Over the past 10 years, I can count GCAF, I can count NEMA, I can count Roots, I can count Giraffe, I can count another one that I forgot, FASTEP. Now, we still have these problems in the horticultural sector. So, I think these questions now are quite pertinent. These projects, we want to ask ourselves, are these projects in a position to solve the horticultural problems for small-scale women farmers? Are they doing a good job? I think we should ask ourselves.
I'll rephrase that question back to you. Are these projects doing a great job for the Gambian horticulture?
Yeah, so I gave you 2 types of beneficiaries from these projects, which is agribusiness firms, which are for profit, run by business owners, and the communal gardens that are occupied mostly by women farmers. So from what we've seen in the field, the experience of these women gardeners, from the difficulties they are facing, I don't think these projects have really addressed their problem. And the problem is mainly with the way projects are run and the way they are considered by our policymakers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gajigo. The other question I want to ask you is fertilizer an issue? What is your experience with different fertilizer techniques?
Fertilizer as an issue, well, it's a very important input. You need it. It's very expensive in the Gambian context. All the people who need it don't get it. In terms of access, there is an issue with it. There isn't enough.
I'll have to ask you this question before moving
Okay.
forward. You said all the people that need it do not get it.
Yes.
We see at the beginning of every rainy season, the government gives out fertilizers to farmers. So what do you mean by not everybody that needs it gets it?
That's a good point. But you said at the beginning of the rainy season.
Yeah.
So horticultural activities take place mainly in the dry season.
Okay.
So that fertilizer that is being given out at the beginning of rainy season is mainly for groundnut cultivators and rice cultivators. It's not for horticulture.
Okay.
By the time the rainy season ends, it is almost completely exhausted in the market, and most vegetable production takes place around November, right after. So there is no government project whatsoever to help people in horticulture for them to have access to vegetable, number one. Number two, the fertilizer that you need for, let's say, banana production or onion or other things is different from the fertilizer that is used for groundnut or rice. Because when you talk about NPK, for instance, there are different kinds of NPK. If you are going to do banana, you need mainly the key ingredients should be potassium. The K bar should be very high. If you are going to do something like rice cultivation, you can have something, an NPK that is like 15, 15, 15. The same thing, there are some crops that do not need any phosphorus, and there are some that require it. So if NPK is a compound fertilizer that has 3 different components, and the relative proportions of those match different kinds of crops that are grown. So I'm glad you brought that up. The point here, the point you brought up actually illustrates what the problem that they are facing. There is no single government project to help the horticultural sector with fertilizer. All the fertilizer projects the government has in each single year is for traditional agronomy, which is groundnut and rice, nothing for vegetable producers.
Considering the lack of learning platforms for knowledge storage and transfer, how do farmers decide which method of fertilizer to use?
Well, if you need to do something and nobody is teaching you and providing with resources, what do? You make the best of what you can do. So, in regards to horticulture, we must admit this is an area where there are now some gardens where there are extension workers.
Okay.
So farmers are able to learn from those extension workers, but it is far from universal. Most of the gardens in the country don't have a single extension worker. So what do farmers do? They talk to other farmers. Sometimes they are lucky. The information they get is correct and they apply things like fertilizer correctly. They have right spacing. They have right sequencing of crops. But in certain situations, they do not have the information that they need. They inevitably end up making errors. Let me give you an example. Onion cultivation, for instance, onion, if you're growing it, you shouldn't grow it in the same area consecutively. You need to, if you grow it in this particular area, you need to skip that particular area, come back maybe after 2 years or so, or even 3 years. If you repeat onion production in the same spot constantly, you will get fungus infestation, and this is something that's very common. Now, some gardeners, some people doing horticultural production in the Gambia know about this, and they shift it from year to year. Some farmers don't know. They have nobody to tell them, and they incur losses from fungus infestations annually. So these are things that can obviously be prevented if the right information is supplied to these farmers and the right training and other materials that they need, which are not difficult, by the way, if this is provided to them.
Dr. Gajigo, based on your experience, could you discuss the techniques and approaches that our farmers engage in plant training, land restoring, and organic farming practice?
I don't think those things you mentioned are a major activity for our horticultural farmers. I mean, those are things you would expect farmers to do whose main problems have been addressed, who don't have to worry about seeds, irrigation, storage, and other things like that. So it's sort of like asking somebody, whether they go into, they like vegetarianism or veganism when they don't have enough to eat. So.
Also, could you elaborate on government practice that affect Gambia's agricultural market and economic outcomes, including those that have a positive and negative impact?
Well, for me, I think for anyone who pays attention to this sector, the main problem is the implementation failure that we have in the country. Now, the thing that you will find is that the government's approach to the horticultural sector, or agriculture in general, is actually how do I put this diplomatically? It's really been just something that has not worked since independence. The view of many of our senior officials is that agriculture, it's okay to have a whole sector whose development finance is done purely by donors and projects. For instance, if you look at the budget of any of the past couple of budgets, what you will find is that the government makes allocation mainly for recurring expenditures, but development finance in agriculture is almost zero. And if you ask the government why that is the case, and I've heard the Minister of Finance mentioning this a couple of times, they would say something to the effect that, oh, it's not here, but don't worry, we have a lot of donors for financing a lot of projects, whether it's the World Bank, ADB, or IFAD, or FAO, they are financing. So the sector is getting a lot of money. It's just that it's not from the government. The problem is that that is a very fundamentally bad way of approaching the financing of a sector. It is why we also don't have any sustainability in terms of the projects. If a project comes, they do something, that project ends, nobody is concerned about what that project has done. Because once we call the project staff, they'll say, hey, that project ended. Sorry, let me give an example. Roots has built a couple of gardens where they drill boreholes. Now, Roots project is going to end next year in 2026. In 2028, if something happens to that borehole, and then you call the Roots officer who was there, they'll tell you, well, that project ended, which is true, there's no money for it. So if your village cannot have the money to replace that borehole, then that project will just collapse. This is the problem you have when a whole sector becomes a project implementing unit of donors. You should not have major intervention in a whole sector or subsector be determined by project finance. You should have an existing plan, and the projects that do come from outside, they should feed into that existing plan. Even if the project ends, but that existing plan is ongoing. And if people have a problem with some intervention there, if they call, there shouldn't be anyone giving them the response that the financing for that project is ended, because the intervention should be based on an existing government plan that should supersede the lifetime of any project.
Contingency.
Yeah, so definitely. So the problem here in the Gambia is not so much policy formulation. If you look in the government itself, there is a national horticultural policy, a strategy. There is a horticultural master plan in the Gambia. These are very well written documents. They should be, because they are written by international consultants who are very qualified. The problem is, how do we go from a policy document to implementation on the ground? And this is where the failure happens. And it's something that has been the story in the Gambia from 1965 to the present.
Thank you very much. What progress have we made as a society in regardless of not being able to implement those policies? What progress have we made as a society in advancing horticultural farming, and what improvement still needs to be done?
I think I partly answered that question in the last one. Well, so we have not made much progress, especially when it comes to village gardens that are populated by women. The problems that they are running into is still the same problems they have had decades ago. I gave the example of Salikeni, where that garden has been operating for 50 years. And if it wasn't for my our non-profit foundation that drill borehole for them, they have not a single tap for 50 years, and there are close to 400 women who actually garden in that area. So the point is, the progress we've had in horticulture is minimal. To the extent that we have made any progress, it is in spite of, not because of any intervention by the government. So there is a lot of work to be done. What needs to be done is clear. What is missing is the will and the capacity to get it done. So that's my response. So to answer your question, the agricultural leadership, the leadership of the country in general, at the level of the president, and specifically at the level of the Minister of Agriculture, there has been an abject failure in their sector. And I think if they have any sense of professionalism, they should all go.